Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to episode 26 of season 13 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown, and this is the only weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Okay, first of all, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Matt Burke, or chats with Matt Burke from Have Gun Will Travel. So, kind of coincidental that we're covering Have Love Will Travel today. Those of you, I didn't plan that, honestly. Those of you who were in Gainesville were as impressed with their set as I was, I'm sure, and I can't wait for my 10-inch gold vinyl of the Voyager Golden EP to arrive next month. Such a great little nod back to put that out as a gold disc. Very clever stuff. The voting for last week's song, The Man Who Loves Women, was fairly spread, with 64% majority rating the track in the 7 to 9 range, 18% putting it in the 6 or below bracket, but 18% also giving it a perfect 10 out of 10 score. Not too many comments this week, but as it's Christmas, I was expecting things to be a little slower. But over on Instagram, Carleen Rowe left this very thoughtful review. These types of songs are as much for the artist as the fans. With Tom's wicked and cheeky sense of humour, I can only imagine the lines and songs that never made the cut because they were, in quotes, unserious. I think a positive reaction to the man comes probably in one of two ways. You're a cheeky, goofy person yourself, and you connect with the mood and humorous instrumentation instantaneously, or, over time, you've made a connection with the personalities of the band, and hearing or seeing these moments of levity brings you closer to the human connection, which for many of us is made deeper and found more frequently in the sharing of music. A slow, now about 4-year immersion into Petty and rock music in general has me now at the live performance watching stage, and I'm always a little sad when there aren't multiple videos available in the archives of the internet for a song. The Man Who Loves Women has a solitary live video, and while it's good, I think it's lacking the vibe back from the audience to take it to the next level. A great track for a more intimate acoustic live performance, but still is likely to miss the mark with many. A skippable track, but one I'm glad is there. The ukulele serves its role in a comedic way at its base, but only endears the song more to those who enjoy the history of Tom, George Harrison, and ukuleles. In my mind's eye, a live performance of this in the right setting would be particularly sweet. 6 out of 10. So, regarding live performances, Carleen, this one was actually only played live twice, so that was the 2 dates at the Olympic, and I think, as a song for a live performance, it's in that Spike / You're So Bad type of spot where you're only going to pull it out for a little levity, and you're only going to do one of those songs. So with Spike, before this one was released, and You're So Bad, I could see why this one doesn't really fit the main set. It is a shame, though, that Tom and the boys never did an MTV Unplugged type show, because as you point out, it would fit perfectly into that type of environment. Over on Facebook, Annette Chapligan, Annette Wilbury, as we know her, from a wonderful person who was down in Gainesville as well. But she comments, in a bigger picture, the whole album sounds Beatlesque, this song too. And I'd agree that the Beatlesy moments poke through in various places on this record, not always necessarily band-centric. For me, it's often just a hint of one of the 4 members of the Beatles. Executive producer Paul Roberts wrote, "Great pod, Kev." Thanks as always, Paul. I always thought of this having a Queen / vaudeville vibe. Palette cleanser for the album conclusion. I'll go 9 with this one. The Queen link's a pretty good one if you think about Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon or Seaside Rendezvous. They share a common ancestor with The Man Who Loves Women. And as I said, I honestly think in a rock and roll context, that common ancestor is Ray Davies and the Kinks. And yes, I realise that Paul McCartney dipped his toes into these waters, but he didn't go knee-deep as often as Ray did, and didn't marry it as subtly to rock and roll as the Kinks pulled off, which is probably why John hated it and called those types of songs Paul's granny music. The wonderful Rich Gibson wrote, "Nice, very different type of track for Tom. I've always thought of it having the vibe of some old songs George Harrison used to cover, like Between the Devil and Deep Blue Sea, made famous by Cab Calloway and released posthumously on Brainwashed. The fact that Tom has just let it form as it has without needing to impose a regular structure on it makes it more interesting and organic as a song. 7 or 8 out of 10 is about right to give us somewhere to go with the scores coming up. Great work as always, Kevin." And dude, thanks as always, Rich. Hope you had a great Christmas, mate. And you know what? Cab Calloway is one of those guys I know next to nothing about. I only really know Minnie the Moocher, and I suspect that if one were to dig into his catalogue, I bet you'd find some real gold in there. So maybe I'll add his name to my listening list for 2026. Speaking of which, during the upcoming year, I've been compiling through friend recommendations a list of albums to listen to that I've never heard, mainly from artists I've also never listened to. My aim is to try to listen to at least one album per week and post a short review or reflection on my blog. And I'll maybe share those to my podcast socials too. I do have some more one-off episodes still on the burner. My Freddie Mercury episode has ended up being a bit more of a labor of love than I expected, because I want to get it right, because Freddie is so important to me in my life musically, and even beyond a little bit. So I want to take my time writing it, but that will be coming in the new year. And I have my year in review episode for you, breaking down my top 8 vinyl purchases from the last 12 months. I think that'll be coming on New Year's Day, but we'll see. This week, I also have another Artist Conversation series episode for you to ring in the new year, as I talk to Robin Vincent, the creative powerhouse behind Robin Shakedown, who was also one of the standout performers for me at the Tom Petty weekend in Gainesville. So that one will drop on Friday for sure, and then her 10 questions will follow on the Saturday. So, thanks as always for your feedback, but let's talk Petty, shall we? This week, we're talking about the second single, but one which feels like another one of those beloved deep cuts from Petty that the masses just missed. Have Love, Will Travel. In Conversations with Tom Petty, author Paul Zollo says, another song from that album, which is really nice, is Have Love, Will Travel, which has 3 sections to it. Tom replies, yeah, it was almost a summary. We're getting further down the line in the story. The DJ comes back into the picture, and there's a girl named Maggie that shows up, which is a little hard to understand because I'd written this whole song that introduced her, but I didn't use that in the end. Now, I don't know if that song has ever surfaced on Tom Petty Radio because I don't listen in regularly, but I can't think of anything we have on any of the compilations we've been treated to that references it or we've heard. I don't know if this song's ever been released, I guess is what I'm saying. And the only song actually I think that's been released from these sessions that wasn't on the album is For Real. But that song doesn't make any reference to Maggie, so maybe one day we'll hear, what that was, if it's in the vault in any state of completeness. Maybe when we get an anniversary of Last DJ, maybe we'll go back and we'll get some of those additional tracks, maybe. Have Love Will Travel was in the setlist for almost every gig in 2002, and it resurfaced in a few sets in 2011, 12, and 13. But again, that shows the strength of the band's catalogue that it never made it into the setlist for, the 40th anniversary tour, say. And I went back and checked, and I was surprised that none of the tracks from The Last DJ made it into that setlist, which is maybe a little surprising given the strength of this album, I think, front to back. So, the song begins on that gorgeous root G chord, and this is a very simple song. We're going to get 5 chords in all, and mainly 4 through most of it, but it's how they're deployed as always, of course it is. Benmont Tench's organ swirls in the background, Tom and Steve Ferroni are laying down a beautiful rhythm section on bass and drums, and the 2 guitar parts shine brightly, with Mike Campbell playing those gorgeous little licks over the top of the groove. The drum fill into the first verse always paints the hugest smile on my face. Very simple, yet not what you'd normally play. You'd usually play that little 5-note fill that Steve does as snare, snare, tom, snare, snare. Or snare, snare, tom, snare, kick, maybe, so that you can kick on the 1, but Steve plays those last 3 notes as kick, snare, kick. It's a super nerdy drummer thing, but I think it's just so cool. In this first verse, we have the Heartbreakers pulling out all the melodic stops, Benmont's piano floating around the strumming pattern on the guitars, and Mike again adding those very simple, unobtrusive licks between the vocal phrases. And those licks have a beautifully southern roots/country feel to them that give this song a very warm glow. And what a first verse lyrically. You never had a chance, did you, babe? So good looking, so insecure. And now you say you can't remember when the lines you drew began to blur. Petty at his absolute peak for me here, folks. The laconic, conversational start to the song just drops you straight into another scene. We had it in Blue Sunday, and we get it again here. This feels like 2 people you know right away. When the lines you drew began to blur. What a brilliant way of saying when your plans start to go wrong. The wheels don't fall off, but the lines blur just a little. Brilliant. After this first verse, we have that great push into pre-chorus when the harmony vocal comes in over top of Tom's lead. The lead guitar steps up and sounds like it's being played in another room, as if it's taking us away to a more distant memory. And this is Tom singing his own harmony rather than Scott Thurston adding a second voice at this point anyway. Yeah, when all of this is over, should I lose you in the smoke, I want you to know you were the one. And I talk about single lines that I'd kill to have written, and we've had one in the first verse already, and we get another one here. Should I lose you in the smoke? So not literal smoke, obviously, but the distractions and busyness of life that can get between two people is what he's talking about here. And that switch to the minor sixth on the line, I want you to know, gives that little extra movement to this section of the song before the cutaway to the chorus lines. So Steve Ferrone is just tickling the ride cymbal as the beat drops away and the notes decay into Tom singing, and may my love travel with you everywhere. Baby, may my love travel with you always. The piano adds the counter melody as the guitars just strum the chord changes to give this chorus a very gentle, very earnest feel. We then have a wonderful 2-bar turnaround in which Mike Campbell plays a really nice transitional lead guitar part. It almost feels like this is a movie, and you have this short interstitial piece of music between two scenes or between two acts. Now, quite often on this podcast, I notice things in a song for the first time. It doesn't happen as often with songs I've listened to 100 times, but it's happened in this critical listen through of this one. So listen right after the first beat of the first bar of this next verse, before Tom starts singing. There's an off-key note that Benmont plays on piano, but the mics in the studio must be just under the lid of the piano, and they're just picking up the resonance on the strings or something like that. And it's an F note over the G chord, and it has a ton of reverb or maybe just room on it. And I'd love to know how that happened and when they decided, hell yeah, we're leaving that in. And man, oh man, this has to be in contention for the list of, best verses that Tom ever wrote, but for me at least. And there's another one in this song to come. Maggie's still trying to rope a tornado. Joe's in the backyard trying to keep things simple. And the lonely DJ's digging a ditch, trying to keep the flames from the temple. So, how to interpret this one? Well, let's go back to what Tom told Paul Zollo first. There's a girl named Maggie that shows up, which is a little hard to understand because I'd written this whole song that introduced her, but I didn't use it in the end. So wouldn't you just love to have that backstory in that song? Here's my read on this. Maggie is free-spirited and lives life by the seat of her pants. She's trying to rope the tornado. She's bold and adventurous. Her partner Joe is more even-tempered and practical, and he's just trying to keep a balance in the house. The DJ comes back, and the ditch he's digging to keep the flames from the temple are the songs and culture he's trying to build around his freeform station to try to stop outside corporate influence from burning down his integrity and his artistic vision, which is his temple. He's the last DJ. He's digging this ditch around rock and roll to protect it from the superficial and the formulaic, and he's digging this ditch for all of us. Now, I'm happy to concede that none of this could be what Tom was writing about or meant, and that perhaps it's just Tom's Dylan-esque ability to construct entire believable characters and narratives in just 2 or 3 lines. But given that there was another song that set up these characters, and the fact that Tom directly references the fact that the DJ comes back into the picture during his conversation with Paul Zollo, I think that this verse, if not the rest of the song, is tied into the central narrative of this album. The pre-chorus changes slightly here with Tom singing, "Oh, and if perhaps I lose you in the smoke down the road, I want you to know you were the one." A small change that doesn't take the song into a completely different area, but rephrases the lyric in a slightly different yet synonymous way. It's attention to detail and excellent craftsmanship at play here, as we'd expect. The chorus plays out as it did before, and I suspect that where the backing vocal in the pre-chorus is definitely Tom, I think the backing vocal in the chorus might actually be Scott Thurston. We also get a slight change up in this next turnaround, which acts as something of a guitar solo, but is more similar to the background painting that Mike is providing in the first iteration. But here, instead of 2 bars, we get 5, before we get the verse that we're all waiting for, the one that every Petty fan knows by heart, and I'm sure every Petty fan adores. All right, folks, it's time for some petty trivia. Your question from last week was this. How old was Little Richard when he made his first recordings for RCA Camden Records at the studios of Atlanta, Georgia radio station WGST? Was he 17, 18, 19, or 20? Well, young Richard Penniman packed a lot into his adolescent years. The kid from Macon, Georgia that we came to know as Little Richard sang in church, ran off with a medicine show, sang in a minstrel troupe, and was adopted by a white family. Then, on October 16th, 1951, in Atlanta, he he made his first ever recordings at the age of 18. The opportunity arose when the singer Billy Wright introduced Little Richard to Zenas Steers, or Zenas Steers, I'm not too sure how you pronounce that, a DJ who championed R&B music on the state-owned radio station WGST. Wright wore heavy makeup and gelled his hair, hugely influencing the style of a young performer who was still some weeks away from his 19th birthday. Songs from that and a later session would be released in early 1952. The 8 tracks Richard recorded for RCA Camden included the blues ballad Every Hour, which was promoted at retail level by Sears and had local success in Atlanta and his hometown of Macon. The tracks later appeared on albums when he had made his name in the first flush of rock and roll, and that first whip of success with Every Hour, however local, was intoxicating for Little Richard and his family, it seems. In White's book, he recalls, "The record began to get a good amount of local airplay, and people came to know me. My daddy was proud of me for the first time in his life. He made sure that Every Hour was played on the jukebox in his club, the Tippin' Inn on Woodcliff Street, as often as possible. He often put the nickels in himself." Your question for this week is this. In the early 1970s, why was Florida a difficult place for Mudcrutch to get radio airplay compared to cities like Los Angeles or Boston? Is it A, AM radio still dominated and focused on national hits? B, FM radios were illegal in cars? C, Florida stations were union only? Or D, the FCC restricted local music programming direction? Okay, back to the song. How about a cheer for all those bad girls and all the boys that play that rock and roll? They love it like you love Jesus. It does the same thing to their souls. After that first line, we get a beautiful organ fill from Ben Mont. So, as with all truly great Heartbreakers songs, they're switching up very small things to keep each section fresh and new. So, Ben Mont filling here rather than Mike is a great little twist. And, as we often talk about Tom's delivery, he really leans into his drawl for the words boys and rock and roll. Those lines just sound so much cooler in that accent than they would in any other. Now, I actually have a question for you guys about the second half of this verse. They love it like you love Jesus. It does the same thing to their souls. So, my question is, if you're a devout Christian, is that line problematic in any way? It's a big statement, and as someone who loves rock and roll and doesn't believe in God, it's 100% accurate for me, but I do wonder whether it's a line that is frowned upon in any quarters. I've also always wondered too if this is a very subtle nod back to John Lennon and the quote that got the Beatles into so much hot water all those years ago in the US. Tom's just affirming here the fact that rock and roll matters for people in a spiritual sense, not just a musical one. And on that note, actually, I'm going to be having a conversation about spirituality and Tom's music soon with a former guest that I'm really looking forward to. So I'm sure I'll forget that I asked this question tonight, and I'll probably ask it again during that conversation. In the last pre-chorus, Ben Mont adds a wonderful seesaw piano motif that builds the song to its climax in a very pleasing way. It's almost like the last scene in the movie when we're not sure until the very last moment if things are going to work out, because those notes are suspended in the chord, so it gives you that slight edge of tension before we resolve into that last chorus. And the last chorus strips things right back to that guitar, light bass, very light drum work, and the doubled vocal. It's repeated twice before we get the end on that last chord. So, when I ran away with my thoughts during the Blue Sunday episode, it occurred to me afterwards that I could have called my protagonists Maggie and Joe. And Tom actually tells Paul Zollo she's kind of the girl in Blue Sunday. But there was another song that really explained her. But something in my brain said, don't be too on the nose. Maybe I should have gone that route, but I ended up with that Zoe with a Y line in my head and I just couldn't shake it. So, as I changed one name, I figured I should change the other. But I did keep their different personalities. I kept one free spirit, one more reserved. Anyway, enough blowing smoke up my own backside here. Obviously, as all good pettyheads know, this song's chorus has its origins in a song from the Wildflowers sessions, titled There's a Break in the Rain. That song was scrapped for parts and ended up in both Have Love Will Travel and I suspect Room at the Top. So when you listen to the way that song begins, it basically is the same sort of idea that Tom used on Room at the Top. So this is a case of Tom knowing that the idea was really solid, but also knowing he didn't have exactly the right song to drop that idea into. So how wonderful that these brilliant lines ended up in such a great track. Now, when I post a poll for this one, I'm going to be very surprised if there are many votes under 10. It's a song that I always feel is, immediate common ground between petty heads and is one that's universally loved. Not least because the sentiment in the chorus is so universal and so beautifully heartfelt. Apart from being a wonderful, tender sentiment, it also fits the narrative within the song completely consistently and seamlessly. Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. Look, you've probably guessed my score already for this one. I would put this among the best songs Tom ever wrote. The pace of it is sublime. The tempo adds to the warm, comforting feel that's offered by the instrumentation. There are small adjustments and nuances that drift in and out of the piece as it moves slowly along the river of your consciousness. Every verse is a diamond. Every chorus gold. So, of course, Have Love Will Travel is a 10 out of 10. How could it possibly be anything else? Okay, first of all, I hope that everyone had a wonderful Christmas if you celebrate Christmas, or a good holiday if you don't, or if you didn't have anything to celebrate or you didn't have holidays. I hope you're doing well regardless. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Boneless Podcasting Network, which is a loose collective of podcasting friends and acquaintances brought together and championed by the inimitable Chaz Charles. Go check out the roster by clicking on the link in the episode notes. You can also check out my other podcasts, which are in the Boneless Podcasting Network. Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I co-host with my very good pal Randy Woods, and the Ultimate Catalogue Clash that I co-host with my very good pal Corey Morissette. I also just recorded the second episode of an annual podcast that I co-host with Corey and our pal Heath McCoy, co-host of the School of Hip podcast that I've been talking about. We get together once a year around Christmas time and go out for drinks. Non-alcoholic for me, as I'm driving, and I don't drink. And we cruise around Saskatoon and just talk about whatever comes to mind. So I'll leave a link in the episode notes for anyone who's interested, for whatever reason, in hearing a two-thirds drunken late-night chat between three friends. Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Blue Sky at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe as applicable, and again, please leave a review or a rating if you haven't done that already. Keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep reading out your comments on the show. And as your weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way. So when you're looking for Tom's music, please visit official streaming platforms, or better yet, I always tell you this, guys, I hope you're doing it, go to your local independent record seller and grab some physical media. Go support local businesses. Very important. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to store.tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merch for this show, go to store.tompettyproject.com. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook. And make sure you also check out Tom Petty Radio on Channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the last track on The Last DJ, the Mike Campbell-led Can't Stop the Sun. Bye-bye.